Greg Chester. I'm president of the Bitterroot chapter at Trout Unlimited, and I want to welcome you to this 20th annual Bitterroot Buggers fly tying class and fly fishing class. In this class, as you know, you're going to be learning the basics of fly fishing, casting, and today we're going to be talking about fly tying. Fly tying is one of the key parts that you can participate in fly fishing. It gives you the opportunity to simulate and imitate fish, the food that fish eat on a regular basis. So we're going to just focus first on some of the tools associated with fly tying. One of the first things that you need is a way to hold the hook, and we have a fly tying vise. There are many, many types of these vices, ranging in $9 up to hundreds of dollars. I can tell you, you don't need anything really fancy. This is one that I've used since 1981, and it still works. It's tied thousands of flies. To mount the vise, we first open up the pad to an appropriate distance, and then we can set that on the table. If you're a right-handed person, you'll want the vise at about this position. Then we're going to tighten it up so that it's firmly mounted on the table. We're going to raise it up to a comfortable height and then rotate it around so that your hook, when you mount it, is at a nice comfortable height for you to tie. This is the jaw portion of the vise, and this is where the hook goes, and you can see by actuating that lever, you can see those jaws going in and out. So after the vise, the next tool we're going to talk about is the bobbin. This is very important. You'll need it for every fly. What this is, it's a way to mount the thread, which you'll also use for every fly. To thread the bobbin, we'll take the bobbin, and then you take the thread, then put your bobbin, I guess you could call them feet, into those holes. There, now we have it in there, and it rotates. Now the next step, we can't tie like that with this thing hanging down. So then we take this old bobbin threader, it goes into the end of the bobbin like that, and then you can see it has a little opening here. So then we're going to take that thread and push it through the opening, try to grab it, and then watch what happens. Now you can just pull this right through, and now your bobbin is ready to use. Also very important are a good pair of sharp scissors, and the finer the point, the better, because that allows you to be able to do some detailed trimming around the fly when you're done. And then with all the materials that we're going to be using, there's something called a Hackle plier. They're actually just pliers. They hold more than just hackle. You can use it to hold wire. When you're wrapping, you can use it to hold most materials. Very, very handy tool. Some patterns use animal hair, such as elk or deer, and in applying those materials, we like to have the ends of the hair very even. So what this tool is called is a hair stacker or a hair evener. So you would put this in here, you would trim off your fibers, you put them tip first in here, tap them, turn it around, and they'll be all nice and even. Very handy tool for anytime you're using the hair material. And then the last tool that's very important is a dubbing needle. It's also called a bodkin. So we use that needle to tease out fibers so that the fly looks very lifelike. And this tool has a very handy feature, it has a hole in the end. So when your fly is all done, you can use this to create half hitches. And we'll talk about that later when we get into the flies. So those are all the tools that you'll need to get started, and none of these are terribly expensive, and they'll all last you a long, long time. Obviously, to be able to tie a fly, we have to put it on something, and that's going to be a hook. There are thousands of styles and sizes available, all appropriate for different kinds of flies. This would be called the shank, a long straight part here. This would be the hook eye. This is where you're going to tie on your line. This would be the bend of the hook. And if you can see that little part right down here, that's the barb. The distance between this tip and the shank up here is called the gap. And when we tie, 99.9% of the material is going to be applied between the back of the shank to a point just behind the eye. That's going to be called the body. In mounting the hook, we first insert it into the jaws, and then you bring down the lever here, and then it locks it in. And then now it's firmly in. There's certain ways that you should mount the hook. We don't want to hide even though it seems like it'd be a cool idea to hide the points so you don't stick yourself, but now you can't get material where it needs to be. You don't want to have it down so low like that you can't get the material onto the back. The proper way to mount it is such that the shank is still above the top of the vise and you can still see the barb. So right about there would be perfect, and then you lock it down and make sure it's good and tight. There's one other thing you might want to think about in hooks in general. As you notice, and we talked about, this hook has a barb right here. The barb for many, many years has always been on hooks, and that helps keep the hook into the fish's mouth once you've caught it. Many of us, and you may find you would like to do the same thing as fish barbless, without a barb. You can take pliers and mash down that little barb so that it isn't there anymore. It'll still hold a fish almost as well as a barbed hook. It'll come out of the fish much easier if you choose to release the fish. And even better than that, it'll come out of you or your friend if you by mistakenly hook them. So if that barb is flat, it'll come right out. If you're going to mash down the barb, now's the time to do it. Because sometimes when you mash down the barb, on smaller hooks, it might break the hook. So you don't want to go through all the trouble of tying your fly and then break the hook. So now that we have our hook in here and it's level with the floor, we're going to take our bobbin and our thread and start wrapping it. This is something you'll do for every fly, and that is wrap the shank with thread in nice even wraps, and it makes a good base for all of your fly material. So we can start right at the eye, and you go over the top of the fly, and then start wrapping over. As you can see, I'm wrapping over the tag end that's in my left hand. You should be able to just tie, and the bobbin will release thread as you need it. Now what we don't want to do is go like this. See how those are not even, they're just all spread over the place. What we'd like to do is have it go nice and even right down the shank. Here's an easy way to accomplish that. This tag end, you could cut it off now, but if you hold it up at about a 45-degree angle, and as you wrap, that forces the threads right into a nice, tight, solid base. And when you start tying your materials on, it'll help greatly in tying the materials. So you can just keep that up here, and for every fly, or with almost no exceptions, we're going to wrap the whole shank all the way down. The other thing, please notice that the distance from the bobbin to the hook is about an inch to an inch and a half. So when you get near the end, and when I say the end, we want to finish right over the barb. So now we're down to here, we can go ahead and trim with your scissors up nice and close. We can trim off that extra piece. And now we can take, and you'll have to dodge the hook point, see, till we get up. Let it hang down until, one more wrap. There, now we're right at the barb, see? That's where we're going to be tying all of our material. Okay, the next thing we're going to do is that every fly has to have material put on it. And there are certain ways that you can mount that material. I have a piece of yarn here. You could, if you just laid it up there and started wrapping, you can see it just flops all around. It's not going to work. So what we do, say if you wanted to tie it on right where that is now, you would lay that up there, have the pads of my fingers right here, right over the thread, holding the material on top of the shank. The main idea here is that we want to tie all material on the top of the shank. This is going to be called the loose wrap method. So now we're going to bring up the thread and pull it in between my fingers, and then down the other side, so it's by the other finger. I pull just a little bit, don't pull tight. And then you do that once more in between the fingers and down. Now that you have 2 loops in there, that's called a loose wrap, now you pinch hard with these 2 fingers and pull straight down. There, now your material is tied right on top. I'll take this off, and say the job was to wrap this forward. So now you can see we're wrapping this, and say we wanted to make a gold body. So every material eventually has to be finished and tied off. Well, let's say we're going to get close to finishing the fly here. Let's say we want to have this gold come right up to the front. So if it's a little short like that, we can just wrap it, wrap it, wrap it. Okay, on every fly, you can see the length of the hook eye. About that same distance back is reserved for the head of the fly. So we don't want to have material enter that space. Otherwise you'll be crowding the head, and it just leads to nothing but problems. So let's say we're now up to that point we want to tie it off. Remember how we do that, that we go once over the top, twice, 3 times, pull it back, and then 1 more. Now we can trim this off. This is just like we did before. And now we're going to finish the fly. So I said that's a head space, so let's just make a nice little head there. All these bugs have a head, so there, that looks pretty good. Now to finish it, I think I told you about the Bodkin and how it can be a half hitch tool. So now we're going to pull out a little more thread, and going from the top, we go top and wrap over this, and keeping the tension just right, we're going to bring that bodkin right up. See how that just slides right over the edge? Just like that. Up and over. Like that. Up and over. 4 is a good number to do. If you don't have one of these, a ballpoint pen works wonderfully for this. And now it's time to trim it. So you can just come up with your, this is where it's nice to have fine point scissors. Just come there and trim it, and now you're all done. In the class, we won't have head cement. It's a cement that goes just on that head to help keep it from unraveling. If for your tying at home, you may want to do that. It's fairly inexpensive. You can buy it at your fly shops. So you would take your dubbing needle, again, this is how handy they are. You dip it into that and apply a little cement to the head. Let it dry, and then before you take this out, admire it and put it in your 5 blocks. You also want to take that pointy end and go through the eye and make sure there's no cement in there. There's nothing more frustrating. Get out in the water, hold this up, try to thread it on your line, and there's all full of cement.